Good evening. Welcome to the Linden Hills History Study Group's January 23 program on the streetcars that ran on Lake Street. The Lake Street streetcar line did more to shape South Minneapolis than any other. It crossed every north-south streetcar line in the city and created the business district that remains important to this day. Streetcar historian Aaron Isaacs will take you on a then and now photo tour of Lake Street. Aaron is a 40-year-plus volunteer with the Minnesota Streetcar Museum, where he serves as the historian, board chair, and motorman. He is also a noted local history author. His books include Twin Cities by Trolley, Twin Ports by Trolley, the Como-Harriet Streetcar Line, the 1940s, the Interurban Special 14, and he is the longtime editor of the Minnesota Streetcar Museum's magazine, Twin City Lines. Aaron has presented very many popular programs to us before. The Minneapolis Reuses the Railroad, Trench Warfare in Midtown Minneapolis, presentation on the Southwest Streetcar, and he's been giving us several of these streetcar lines tours, Bryant, Nicollet, and now Lake. So thank you very much.
Just a show of hands, how many of you have been at any of these other then and now streetcar line presentations? All right. Now, with this one, we will have used up all the lines in Southwest Minneapolis, and so it'll be interesting to see if they want me to do any more of these. But what we're going to do is we're going to run the length of Lake Street from the city limits at France Avenue all the way to the river. And the format, as the format has been with the other ones, is I'm going to show you, I went out there, I have a whole series of historic photos, but I went out there to try to capture as close as I could to the very same picture today. So what you always will see is you'll see the today view, and then I'm going to follow it with the then view. And it's you know, you get to compare what happened. And so we're going to start out there. Way in the distance there is Lake and France. Now there were actually two streetcar lines running on Lake Street. We're going to take the lesser of the two, which was the St. Louis Park line. The St. Louis Park line, which was one of the very first converted to bus in 1938 because it wasn't very heavy. And it ran out Hennepin Avenue, shared it with the Como-Harriet as far as Lagoon Avenue. And then it took off and went out Lagoon Avenue and then Lake Street and then into St. Louis Park. And it followed Lake Street out, if you know where the roller rink was, and it went out right by the old high school and ended there at Brownlow Avenue. And so, and it was actually built by a private developer who was developing land in St. Louis Park, and they needed a way to get there, so he went and built this thing. So what obviously you're up on top of the bridge that's over the railroad track and what will be the light rail, and it's also over the Greenway. Interestingly, this is the third bridge at that site. Many of you within your lifetimes probably remember there was one before this. It was a concrete bridge, a little bit less rounded. So here's that very same view. Now this is when the original bridge, this is I think 1904, and the original bridge is being replaced. And what happened here, if you see that little streetcar in the distance, they had to break the streetcar line during the construction of the bridge. And so they ran a shuttle. You can see the shuttle car, and he's just shuttling. People had to go and walk across the bridge to go from the downtown streetcar to the shuttle car during the duration of the construction. Actually, 1916, I can see the date is right on there. But it was this little wooden bridge. And so, of course, the Calhoun Beach Club. And the Calhoun Beach Club, I think, goes back, does anybody know the construction of the date of that? I think it was in the teens or 20s. Anybody know? Ruth? 20s? Okay. Well, here's the view. And you can see the streetcar tracks were in the median of Lake Street. So they were on their own right-of-way in the median. And it was a single track line until they built the big bathhouse. And here's the, I'm sorry. This is the view today, and here's the bathhouse. Anybody remember the bathhouse at Lake Calhoun?
Swimming lessons there.
Right. And of course, in the later years, it didn't look as grand as this. It didn't have the towers. It was kind of a functional structure. But anyway, when they opened this thing, there was such demand to get out to it that they had to go and put in the second track from Lagoon and Hennepin out to where Excelsior and Lake Street split. And put in turnarounds there, Y tracks there, and they ran special summer shuttle cars back and forth between uptown where they would connect with other lines and out to the bathhouse. It was such a big attraction. Now here's one where I don't have a today photo, but here's a panoramic view of the bathhouse. You're on the west side of the lake, and if you look up there on the very right and the very left, you can see the streetcars. But as you can see, it's a really big deal. So anyway, here I am in my car because I didn't want to stand in the middle to get, basically when they got rid of the streetcar tracks, that's when the third lane appeared on Lake Street. They just took the tracks and made the lane out of it. And so back before the bathhouse was built, this is what you had. And what you see there on the right are the big ice houses, where they'd take the ice off Lake of the Isles and off Cedar Lake, the Cedar Lake Ice Company. As a matter of fact, we have in one of our streetcars, we have what we call a car card, one of the interior advertisements from the Cedar Lake Ice Company. It's from the 30s. And the husband is trying to convince the wife to get one of these newfangled electric refrigerators, and she says, no, I prefer my ice box. Okay. Now, the streetcar ran up Lagoon. It didn't run up Lake Street. And I did not realize this until a couple of years ago, but you may recognize this. This is directly across from the Lund's parking lot. And these buildings were built in about 1915, and as part of the deal, they built a streetcar waiting shelter, and that's what that thing is. I've been by there a million times, and I didn't realize it. If you go in there, well, there it is. It's got waiting benches in it. And the reason was that after they went and opened up the beach, right across the street from there in the Lund's lot, which was Holmes Avenue. It's been vacated now. It's actually kind of an alley there now. They would go in and pull back and Y, which meant that they would back into Holmes and then get reversed. And that was directly across the street from here, and that's why there's a waiting shelter there. Okay, getting back to Lake Street. Oh, I'm sorry. So then at Lake and Hennepin, you pick up the Selby-Lake line. The St. Louis Park line is headed for downtown, and we're going to follow the Selby-Lake line. And the Selby-Lake line was opened in 1905 across Lake Street, and then in 1906 across the Lake Street Bridge. They had to strengthen the Lake Street Bridge to handle streetcars, and extended up to Cleveland Avenue, where it met the Selby Avenue line in St. Paul. The Selby line had been in St. Paul for a long time, but by extending it across the river like this, you got kind of a twofer. You got a radial line out of downtown St. Paul that went out Selby Avenue to Fairview, jogged a couple blocks up to Marshall, and then across the river, and then all the way across South Minneapolis. Now, this was the first big crosstown line, and what this did was it completely changed how development occurred in South Minneapolis, and it completely changed how people traveled. Before, if you wanted to go, all these north-south lines already existed, except for like Grand Avenue that came a little bit later. But they all existed, and if you wanted to go from, say, 38th and Chicago to Lake and Hennepin, you had to go downtown and transfer and come back out. And the example I give is if you were at Lake and Nicollet and you wanted to go to Lake and Hennepin, and that's 1 mile, that was about a 40-minute ride on the streetcar to downtown, about 20 minutes in and about 20 minutes out. Now, with this crosstown line, you could do that in about 4 minutes. And what happened, because you had free transfers, you couldn't get off and continue in the same direction. But if you were, say, coming up Nicollet Avenue, and you were going to take the Lake Street car, you could get off with your transfer at Lake and Nicollet and go and do some shopping or some banking or whatever it was, and then get on. And that's what created all of these business nodes along Lake Street, was the fact that you could transfer between the streetcars. It dramatically increased the ridership because instead of just people coming from downtown, now you could pick up another whole load of people getting on at Lake Street to go further south. So anyway, that's what the line did. So now we're back just west of Lake and Hennepin. So here we are at Lake and Holmes, and you're looking east. And this is the same view in, I want to say, this is about 1940, 1945. And by the way, you see it said, one little guy says Deep Haven Bus Company. There were a whole series of little suburban independent bus companies that ran from the suburbs. And this guy started in Deep Haven and came in Minnetonka Boulevard and Lake Street all the way, and then downtown on Hennepin. And by this time, the St. Louis Park streetcar line is gone, and so that MAC bus you see on the left, which is run by Twin City Lines, is running out to St. Louis Park. And you can see the Christmas decorations are up. So let's see, we got a Christian Science reading room, we've got the Hasty Tasty, there's a fur shop. Pardon me? Oh yeah, I'm sure the Rainbow Cafe was right on the corner. Yeah, I'll try not to go through these too fast because it's fun just to, you know, see what's still there and what isn't there anymore. Okay, now we're going to move up a block to the corner of Lake and Hennepin. And there you can see Stella's Fish Cafe and you know, that line of buildings on the left side, on the north side of Hennepin, those are all buildings that are still there, at least in this block from Hennepin to Girard. Okay, now, there you go. Same one. And if anyone wants me to flip back and forth between them so you can contrast it.
Is that Linden Oldsmobile down there?
It would, yes, it would be. Yeah, you always forget that Lake Street was Automobile Row. As a matter of fact, you know, the Majors and Quinn bookstore, that's the old Dodge dealership.
It was that way up through the 60s, wasn't it?
I think it was, yeah.
But I remember going to school here. I remember there was a traffic light.
You went to Calhoun School?
No, I went to
West High School?
University in the mid-60s. It seems to me I remember there was a lot of dealerships.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Okay. And so now that's the intersection of Lake and Girard, and we're looking west. And now the building at right, which Stella's Fish Cafe apparently is just folded, but that was the old Calhoun Theater. And here you see it. And here, by the way, is where the Lake Street line ended. Originally, the Lake Street line went and wide out here and backed down to Hennepin Avenue. So in other words, they turned right here, and then they backed down to Hennepin, they sat in the middle of the street. And by the way, they sat facing east in the westbound traffic lane. And then when it came time to leave, if you look a little past the intersection, you see a crossover track. And they'd take the crossover to the eastbound track and go. Well, people complain, it's like, for crying out loud, there's a streetcar taking its layover in the middle of the westbound, and this was Highway 212 back then. So they wound up having to pull into Girard and sit there and take its layover. But that arrangement lasted into the 1940s. Okay, let's go, now we're going to turn around. And now this is the vacant lot between Girard and Fremont. And as you can see, you know, it's all just kind of other than the residences. And you're speaking of car dealerships, Jacobson, Plymouth, and Dodge. And I think they were also the ones who owned the Majors and Quinn. I think when they expanded, they kind of moved around the corner here. So that's what was on that corner. Okay, now we're at the corner of Lake and Lyndale. We're just moving east. And the little building on the right is still there. The building on the left is still there. Now, here's the view. You can see where it says it's a drugstore on the corner. There were drugstores everywhere. This was before CVS and before, I mean, Walgreens was in town, but there were all these little independent drugstores everywhere. You see them, that and little markets on the corner. As a matter of fact, I think on the other side of the street, on the left side of the street, that looks like GS, that probably says drugs too. And what's happened here, by the way, this is a Bryant Avenue streetcar that came up Bryant, turned onto Lake for 2 blocks, and is trying to turn onto Lyndale unsuccessfully. And so you got the shop guys are out there, and the service truck is from Nicollet Station is out there, and they're trying to put this thing back on the tracks. And that, of course, attracted a newspaper photographer, and that's why this picture exists. Okay. So now, this is the corner of Lake and Lyndale as it is today. You're looking east. And so the building, the kind of brownish stone building, that's its Greek to me on the left. So here's what it looked like really early. And as you can see, the It's Greek to Me building is still there. The one on the corner to the right, that building is still there. If you look, you know, it's the same building, it's painted it different. That wood building on the far corner, that's been replaced by something newer, which has kind of a 1940s look to it. And this was before they figured out that they needed to put phone lines and electric lines underground. And there was something called the City Beautiful movement. And Peter, you probably know all about that, but I think one of the things they tried to do is get rid of some of these darn phone lines.
Did they still have horses delivering then, or when was that?
Yeah, this was about 1905, 1903, something like that. And so, yeah, there were still, you know, not very many people had automobiles even, let alone trucks. You can see there's a hardware store on the corner. Okay. Okay, now we're down at Grand Avenue. And this is just west of Grand, and these buildings are still there. And one of them is, what does that say? Oil burning something or other, like a stove place or something. This is the Grand Avenue streetcar. The Grand Avenue streetcar came out Nicollet to Lake, jogged over to Grand Avenue, and then went out Grand to 48th Street. And they used some of these newer lightweight cars that were built in the 20s. They only had a couple dozen of them. And okay, now we're just west of Blaisdell Avenue. You're looking east, and if there's a place that urban renewal screwed up, it's Lake and Nicollet. You know, it's just, they put in that Kmart with the big empty parking lot that never was more than a quarter full, and this is what you had before, the same location. There were 2 movie theaters in those couple of blocks. There's the Western Auto Store, the Vogue Theater, and the American Theater. And of course, right behind the buildings, the commercial buildings on the right was Nicollet Ballpark, which came right up to the back side of those buildings. Okay, now we're at Lake and Nicollet looking northwest. Once again, it's just a wasteland. You know, they're going to open up Nicollet again and hopefully put something here. But as you know, this vacant lot has just been vacant forever and ever. There was a grocery store in there. You can see the building at the right. The post office has been using it. This is what was there before. Got a candy store on the corner, an auto parts store, Northwestern Auto Parts. And that, by the way, the term for all that track in the foreground is special work. And this is Lake and Nicollet, and you had streetcars kind of going from everywhere to everywhere, so you had all of this track in the street, and it was all laid with Belgian blocks, big granite blocks about the size of a loaf of bread. And there's still lots and lots of these underneath the asphalt. When they abandon the streetcars, they just put kind of crowned asphalt over them. And so every once in a while now, they'll go and they'll tear up a street down to the dirt finally and replace the utilities and all. And when they expose the Belgian blocks, they all just disappear because everyone wants them for landscaping.
How did they run the switches there?
The switches originally were hand throw, and there'd be a guy out here whose job it was to pry the switch over. But starting in the 1920s, they came up with electric-powered switches. And there would be in the overhead wire a contactor approaching the intersection. And if you went over the contactor with the power off, the switch would be straight. And if you went over it with the power on, there was a motor in there, and thwap, it would thwap the switch to take the corner. As a matter of fact, I did an oral history with somebody, and he said that the public was savvy, because if you had a rainy day and water had pooled and collected in the switch, when the switch slapped over, people would get splashed, like up on the curb and such, and people knew to avoid that. So that's Lake and Nicollet. Okay, now this building is still there. As a matter of fact, both of these buildings are historic, even though the other has that horrible kind of gravel finish on it that they've been doing. But this is the corner of Lake and 4th Avenue. 4th Avenue is just, the intersection is in the left corner of the picture. The building across the street you see there is original. North Star Mini Storage, I think this was a cold storage facility originally. There it is. And as you can see, the building is Lake Street Pontiac. See, it's the same building, same roof line. Only now it's a Mexican business of some sort. What is this? Yeah, Pontiacs this year. The 445 Pontiac. All right, now we're at the corner of Lake and Park. And you can see the storage building way down there. This building on the left is historic. And this is the same view then. There was a cafe in there. What does they say, appliances? Yeah, appliances. Now there's one little detail, and it's kind of hard to see, but if you look on the overhead wire pole right above that first car, and you see a car stop sign there. And the car stop signs were vertically lettered and hung on the poles. But that's an unusual car stop sign. What you can't see there is it says Sunday stop. And it was a stop that they only made on Sundays because there was a church, and I think still is, down on 31st Street, 1 block away. And they did a lot of church business.
You don't see the trees anymore either.
I don't know if there's still trees there or not. Probably not. There's a Taylor. Now, of course, this particular view didn't look like this before the George Floyd riots, because there were buildings there, and those buildings were torn down, were burned. But this is what you had. And those buildings all on the corner survived until really pretty recently.
What's the intersection?
This is Chicago. And so you're crossing the Chicago Avenue line. You can see the tracks going across. And this was, and always has been, one of the busiest transfer points in the system. When we went and built the transit center in the parking lot to the north, you can barely see it there on the far left. We wanted to get it off the intersection. But even with Metro Transit, we had 3,000 people a day transferring there. And it was even busier back then. Chicago Avenue, I'm an old transit planner, and what we would keep track of was what we called the maximum load point. And the maximum load point was when the cars were at their most full, because you had to go and see what was happening at the maximum load point to decide how much service to put on the line. And on all the lines that went to downtown, there'd be a point kind of out on the fringe of downtown that would be the maximum load point. On the Lake Street line, Lake and Chicago was the maximum load point. And unlike most of the lines that went downtown, where they'd sort of fill up until you got to downtown, on Lake Street, it was on and off, on and off, on and off. These things had turned their load over 2 or 3 times in the course of a trip. But the point where the most people were on the streetcar was Lake and Chicago. And that's because they were using it to move between the different lines and the different neighborhoods and to do these short shopping and business trips. The line had a very different feel than anyone else. Until you got across the river, then it became a radial line to St. Paul, and it gradually fill up till you got to downtown St. Paul.
Maybe Sears had something to do with that. A lot of people shopping at Sears.
Well, sure. Now Sears, I should explain this. Sears and Montgomery Ward each had a big facility. The Sears here at Lake in Chicago, the Montgomery Ward over just east of Snelling University. And the reason that those two were built at that site was it wasn't just a retail store, it was also a regional distribution center. And it was both of those sites were unusual in that they had superb streetcar service, 2 different lines at the front door, but at the back door it was a railroad connection where they'd bring the boxcars in. If you go down on the Greenway, and there's kind of a big long shed, concrete enclosed shed, and that's where they put the boxcars in to Sears and unload them. But that weird combination of freight railroad at the back door and streetcars at the front door was what made this and the Montgomery Ward in St. Paul possible. Okay. Now we're down at Lake and Bloomington. And of course, this is kind of, the epicenter of Hispanic development on it. And so, you can see the buildings are brightly colored, and but all of these are original buildings. You can see the theater down there. This is what it looked like. And that's the Keller Drug. Keller was one of those old drugstore names. Keller Drug, Butler Drug, kind of local chains of drugs. I like this picture.
It's down this.
Yeah, Inga Bretson's would be kind of behind the camera. What do we got there? We got a bowling alley, pastry shop. There's a bar there called the Stein. There's a cafe in the corner. Yeah, a lot of good stuff there.
What year did you build?
This is about this would be like 1952. All of these photos you're seeing are basic, with a few exceptions, are about 1950 to 53. The line quit in 53. They were converted to bus in 53. Okay, now we've turned around. We're still at that same spot, just east of Lake and Bloomington. Now you're looking the other way on Lake Street. And here, not quite as much still exists. This is what was there, though. There were movie theaters just all over the place. And a lot of the buildings still exist. We did a presentation for Linden Hills History Study a number of years ago. The guy who wrote the book on all the movie theaters that have ever been in the Twin Cities did a program for us. And I went out looking for the buildings. And it's amazing how many of these are still there being used as something else. They're not movie theaters anymore. Not this one. And what's happened here, you can see this is a newspaper photo, and there's a fire truck on there, and you can see the streetcars are all backed up. So clearly there's been a fire at the corner. And one of the disadvantages of streetcars is if something got in the way, you were stuck. You couldn't detour. And let's see, Cook's Paints is there. Can't really read any other. There's the bowling alley again.
I noticed there's a difference in the signage. They have these signs that stick out like this that they don't have anymore.
Yeah, I know. I love those signs. This is the corner of Lake and Cedar. Now, once again, at Bloomington, they crossed the line, crossed another streetcar line. At Cedar, they actually crossed 2 streetcar lines here. And this was the old Cedar Florists. And there it is, Cedar Lake Floral Company, same building. And there you can see the various connecting tracks and such. Now this is the Pioneer Cemetery, and it's located starting at Cedar, going over to, I want to say, 21st Avenue. And there's a group of volunteers that maintain this place. I think there's a staff, but it's largely volunteers. Apparently, nobody living today knows anybody who was buried in there because it was, so long ago. And this was, and I want to say to the left, I think this was the old furniture barn. Anybody remember the furniture barn?
Oh, yeah.
Which stuff there.
Oh, you did? Which looked kind of like a barn. Well, anyway, that's where it was. There it is. Obviously, nothing really changed there. Now, you can see a track diverging at the right, and the track was to Lake Street Station, which was one of the streetcar barns. There was a streetcar barn at 31st and Nicollet, and then there was this one at Lake Street Station. We'll take a look at that in just a second. And so now you're at the very same intersection, but you're looking east on Lake Street. And everything here is new. You got new condos. You got the Hiawatha and the light rail crossing in the distance. You got the new YMCA on the right. Everything's new. This is what was there. And you can see, used Lake Street, used car lots, as well as new dealerships. And down on the east end of Lake Street, there are still a couple of three little bitty used car lots. That would be an interesting story, how those have managed to survive. And then at the left, and you can barely see it at left, is the streetcar barn. This is going kind of quick, by the way. We're going to be done pretty quick. And so now I've moved a block to the east. This is 23rd Avenue, and you're looking back towards there was an Aldi in that building. I think he's gone now. But there's the streetcar barn. That's that High Lake Shopping Center that they have, it's been improved, but it was this kind of little 1950s strip mall shopping center, is on the site of the streetcar barn, because the streetcar barn had the offices here, the maintenance bays, and then behind that was this great big open streetcar yard just full of tracks, and that's where they stored the streetcars. And matter of fact, you can see the tracks diverging to go in, because there was an entrance to the yard on both ends of this. Now this one, okay, so we've crossed Hiawatha, and this really looks different, because if you remember, Hiawatha was just, a two-lane road that crossed at grade, and this is the railroad track that paralleled Hiawatha. This, by the way, was the second railroad in Minnesota. The first railroad was built from Minneapolis to Old St. Anthony in 1862. This was built in 1864. The Minnesota Central, this is the one that runs down along Hiawatha, goes to Minnehaha Park, and then it used to then, if you've taken the bike trail that goes down below Fort Snelling along the river, that's this railroad. And it crossed the river on a trestle. It had a station for Fort Snelling right below it, and it crossed right under the Mendota Bridge, and then headed south to Faribault and Owatonna. And this was actually the first connection to the National Rail System. In 1865, it connected down at Marquette, Iowa, with the line coming out of Madison, Wisconsin. That was the first time there was actually a connection to Chicago and points east with the railroad. Before then these things would just feed the riverboats. So anyway, this is off of Google Street View, which is why there's writing on the street. And so this is what it looked like before. And I mean, there wasn't a whole lot there, gas station on the corner. Okay, so then you turn around. I'm on the north side of the street, and this is the bus shelter that's right by that railroad grade crossing, right next to the Target store. If you were to swing the camera to the left, you'd see the Target store. And as you can see, everything here is new. The first intersection is Snelling Avenue, not the Snelling Avenue in St. Paul, but Minneapolis' own Snelling Avenue. But this is what was there before. It was the Minneapolis Moline tractor plant. And the reason that this newspaper thing was taken is this is a strike. And so they're not happy about something, and they're blocking the street. But this plant went a quarter mile to the north, up to where the Greenway is today. Huge tractor plant. And there you see, now here, of course, okay, now we're at the intersection of Lake and 27th Avenue. And this, of course, was the epicenter of the George Floyd riots where everything got burned down. And so there's the AutoZone. They've reopened it. Although there wasn't anything else here. It was just parking lots and such. Here's what it was before. And there you see behind the second streetcar, you can see the Minneapolis Moline plant, this big facade and the double M there for Minneapolis Moline. And this is where it crossed the Minnehaha Avenue line. This was the line that went to Minnehaha Park and Fort Snelling. Came down 27th Avenue and then a block south of here, turned on Minnehaha and went to Minnehaha Falls and to Fort Snelling.
Aaron, could you back up,
Sure.
strike one?
The-
Where they're on strike?
Yeah, so this Minneapolis Moline, the big double M is just around the corner. And you can see they're in front of the office. Remember had factories, there would always be a sign, the office? Yeah.
So Toro was across the street to the right, somewhere.
Did Toro have a plant there?
Toro had a plant there for a while, yeah.
I did not know that.
They moved out to Maine.
Huh.
They already make out the Paul Peter building and the old Oddfellows Hall.
What year was the strike?
Well, you look, it's kind of 1940s, I'm going to say. Yeah, it looks kind of 40s, with if you go by the automobiles. Okay. There's a Snyder drugstores. Wasn't there both Snyder's and Snyder Brothers drugstores, and it was the same family kind of competing with itself? And what's that little hamburger place? There's a little Art Deco behind that first streetcar. I don't know what that is. Okay, this is the corner of 31st Avenue. And there's just a McDonald's there, and I think might be it's either a bank or a funeral home. I can't remember which. But there was kind of a surprising thing there at the time. There was an ornamental iron place. It says right there on the left, ornamental iron. And I always wondered if that had something to do with Twin Cities Ornamental Iron, which is just north of there on 27th Avenue, just above the Greenway. It's not. It's one of the buildings that suffered a fire during the riots, but it had been filled with artists after Ornamental Iron shut down. Oh, this particular one, they painted this streetcar. This is like 1951, and they want you to choose a career in the military. This is during the Korean War. That's what that is. It's promoting military service. Okay, we're at the corner of 36th Avenue, and this is the last transfer point. There's a line that ran on 36th Avenue, and it twisted its way through the Longfellow neighborhood, south of Lake Street, and crossed the Ford Bridge and ended at the Ford plant. So it kind of centered in the neighborhood. That's an old movie theater. That's the El Lago movie theater. El Lago. And there it is in business. And what we got? We got Xerox antifreeze. And I can't tell what's playing on the movie theater. Now we're looking the other way at 36th Avenue. There was a White Castle left on the corner, and they tore it down and they put up a Tim Hortons. It was the Canadian invasion that failed. And it was open there for about a year and it closed. So there's a closed Tim Hortons right there. And one time when I was a cab driver in high school, I took the manager to the White Castle to go to work. And I said, what is it about White Castles that kind of upset people's stomachs? He says, I think it's the onions. I didn't expect to get a real answer out of the guy. Okay. And so this is the same view. Now that hardware store, the River Lake hardware store, just closed a couple of years ago. There's a big Fratellone's hardware about 3 blocks east of there. But it didn't put this guy out of business. It took a long time to put this guy out of business. Hardware stores die hard, I think. So, and I can't read what the other sign there says. American Rug Laundry. Everyone take their rugs to American Rug Laundry? This is a venerable business. How venerable? There it is. Same building.
Same business.
It's changed hands a couple of times, but they do exactly the same stuff there. And I got to admit, I get a kick out of the idea that you got a building, a business that's lasted this long. Huh? You got to admire that. We're almost done here. The Lake Street Bridge, of course, the old Lake Street Bridge survived. I'm not quite sure when they put this one up. Anybody have a date on that?
Remember, because there was a death on that.
Yeah, and if you remember when they tried to take the old one down, it wouldn't go. This thing, when it was in existence, the streetcars had a 10-mile-an-hour speed limit over it because they thought this bridge was so rickety, and then they dynamited it and it wouldn't fall down. And of course, the new bridge has a hump on it, and the old bridge was completely flat. And so here's the old bridge, wooden walkway. And that is the end of my little slideshow.
Just to answer the earlier question, the Minneapolis strike was 1946.
Thank you. That looks about right.
Any other questions or comments?
Peter's got, well, yeah, there's one.
What is the metal work on the sidewalk there?
I think that was something that was added later to try to keep cars from in the roadway. That's all I can think of.
And just driving on the streets of Minneapolis now, I would think the streetcar maintenance to keep ice and snow out of the tracks would have been a monumental task.
Yeah, what they did for ice and snow, they had 17 streetcar snowplows, big, heavy, with wings on them, and in a typical street, in 2 passes, you could clean them. They also had what they called sand cars and salt cars that would go and distribute sand and salt on the tracks. And in addition, all the streetcars had sanders on them. There was if you get on our car, streetcar 1300, and look under the peanut row seat on the front, on the right and left, there's a sandbox there, and there's compressed air, and it still works. And it pipes and puts the sand right in front of the front wheels. And so, yeah, however, it was difficult with the ice and the snow.
There's a peanut roll.
Oh, I'm sorry, those are the sideways facing seats that were up in the front behind the operator.
Why call them peanut?
Nobody knows. It's,
Buried in history.
Karen, can you talk a little bit about where all these historic photos come from?
yeah, this is the Minnesota Streetcar Museum's photo collection, which I curate. And I've been building this up over the years. There's about 13,000 photos in it. And what I've gone to every source I can think of, and newspaper photos, historical societies, you name it. There were also a lot of trolley fans back then, both locally and from other cities, most notably Chicago. And we got all their old collections. And so what's made this photo collection, because especially the trolley fans were out there taking pictures in residential neighborhoods and little business districts that tended not to get photographed. And so it's kind of an unintentional record of parts of the city that you do not see in other photo collections, which is what has made it possible for me to do these different shows up and down little streets like Bryant. 2,500 of our photos are on the Minnesota Digital Library. You can get them on our website, or you can go to Minnesota Digital Library and find them, and they're keyword searchable. And there's also a lot of them on our, we have a YouTube channel at the Streetcar Museum. And on it is 2 hours of vintage video of these things when they were running, broken into 5 different programs, including one on Duluth, and about 50 different slideshows, including some that I've done here, with narration and all that, with all of these pictures on a whole bunch of different topics. So if you want to see more of this stuff, just go Google Minnesota Streetcar, in the search box on YouTube, put in Minnesota Streetcar Museum and click on the videos, and they're all there just in the order that they were put up. But I'm proud of this. If there's an accomplishment, it's been getting this photo collection kind of out and available to people that I'm pleased with.
Okay, I grew up in Minneapolis, and I rode the streetcars a lot when I was young. And a common trip I made was from our house in northeast Minneapolis on the Johnson-Bryant line downtown Minneapolis to go to the YMCA.
Okay.
Now, growing up, I seem to remember that there was a lot of different kinds of stories about what we called the cow catcher on the front. I don't know if that was the official term for it or what. But is there anything you can tell us about the cow catcher on the front of this whole streetcar?
Yes, the official term is a fender. And, oh, well, no, that's what they were called. And it's basically a woven steel basket on the front of the streetcar. And there you see it, and it's a people catcher. And the whole idea was, obviously, if that wasn't there and the streetcar runs over you, you're probably going to die. That thing will hit you in the ankles and dump you in the basket, and you may be hurt, but you won't necessarily die. And I had an old bus driver who had been a streetcar motorman back when I was working for Metro Transit, and he told me he was working the Owl, the overnight runs one time, and he was going north on North 7th Street, and he said, I must have hit this drunk and not known it, because he stood up on the fender and looked me in the eye. And there is also no question, I've seen a number of documents documenting the fact that it saved people's lives.
Well, I was told that kids would jump on him and ride him as a dare.
Well, it was a little hard to do that simply because the motorman could see you and put a stop to it. But when the streetcars were originally built, the bumper in the back protruded, about yay far out from the body and had a flat surface, and kids would climb on the back and hitch a ride. And the streetcar company retaliated by putting 45-degree angled sheet metal over that so that they couldn't get up on there and do that. Now, what was also a lot of kids would do is they would go and they'd be on a bicycle or a wagon or something and grab a hold of the back of the streetcar and be pulled along. That was something that happened a lot.
I saw that once before.
You did, okay. Yeah, we have, one of the things that happens at the streetcar is we get old guys like you probably who come and confess their various delinquencies. The most common of which was to kind of run out of the bushes and grab the trolley pole rope and pull it down, which would would cut the power for the car. And the motorman just hated that. And they go chasing after the kids, and the kids will run away. And
I could tell you one interesting story.
please.
That the Johnson Street trolley streetcar came up Johnson Street, and it turned around on 33rd.
That's right.
It'd go up the Johnson Street hill a little bit, and then back into 33rd Street and sit there, and then pull out and go back downtown. Well, there was a little neighborhood grocery store that sat in the corner there, and I think the last name of it was Red's. I don't remember what it was called. And they had a payphone in the back of the grocery store, and the kids used to. The thing was is if you picked up the phone off the hook on the payphone, just as the trolley was backing around and sparked on the lines up ahead, it would dump the change box. You couldn't do it. It didn't happen. You couldn't get it to happen every time, but once in a while, it would dump money all over the place, a bunch of nickels. And the guy that ran a grocery store, he didn't care because the kids would scoop up the money and buy candy. So that was entertainment.
Well, let me tell you another thing those kids did at that intersection, and we have photo proof of it. They went and jammed some rocks in the switch, what they call the frog, where the rails crossed to get into that 33rd, and derailed the streetcar and it went through the corner of that store. And And we've got a newspaper photo of the thing in the corner of the store. And these kids that are about 12 years old just kind of leaning against the car.
What year was this?
It'd be 1940 something. And there's a whole crowd of people around.
Tim and his buddies.
Yeah, yeah, it might have been you. I don't think, but
I was 50s, I was in the 50s.
yeah, but yeah, they. I think it's the same kids. Anybody else here?
My wife lived in the Northeast and went to school there and was a school patrol person. And she would often tell a story about when she was on the patrol and the Johnson streetcar, apparently there was a hill at some point, and she occasionally was a mean little kid, and in the winter, the streetcar would try to get a run at it because if it was icy at all, it had to keep going. So what she would intentionally do, as she saw the streetcar coming up the hill, was step out in front and put the sign up for the kids to cross. The streetcar didn't make it and slid back down the hill.
Yeah, that hill is kind of around 19th, 20th Avenue Northeast, and it's a pretty good hill. And the other thing we've had people admit to is greasing the rails on the hill. One of the favorite spots is over at 46th and Xerxes, where it tips over the hill and it's pretty steep. And
Anybody else? Fun stories.
hi, Bob.
The Toro Company moved from Lake Street to Bloomington in 1952.
Okay, good to know.
And I just saw there's photo of it. The address was near Longfellow Field. So
Okay.
That's right in that area where Moline.
Huh, I had no idea.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, very good, guys. Thanks very much.